Hey guys, just a quick video on how to extract attack speed breakpoints for different skills. I'm going to be using puncture for this example, but you can use the same methodology for essentially every single skill. It might be a bit problematic if this skill has a cooldown, but for those skills you probably do not need attack speed breakpoints anyway, at least not as badly. So what you want to do is you want to remove all sorts of attack speed everywhere. And it's very easy to accidentally leave some sources out, like from attacks, from Paragon nodes, or from passives like this, for example, close combat. Make sure you remove it. And then do a quick test by attacking the target dummy, and make sure that you do not get any random attack speed increases. Do this for every single test to make sure that your data is reliable, and then you just start collecting data. To collect data, essentially just record yourself at 60 FPS, attacking the training dummy or anything that is static and doesn't move. And as you can see, every single time my character does damage, deals damage, you will essentially have a clean starting point for where you can start counting your frames. For skills that use resources, you can instead use the resource globe to track when the resources disappear. The amount of frames between the the spendings of energy, for example, will also be the same thing as tracking the damage instance. And it might be easier when you have skills that are very fast or attack multiple times to track exactly how frequently casting it by just looking at the energy instead. An example of this could be rapid fire, for example, that has that behavior. Now, when you have started to collect your frame data, make sure that you start at the lowest possible. For example, daggers is not actually the slowest possible. You would have to use swords, which is 1.1 attacks per second instead, and then gradually build up to daggers, which is 1.2, and then you continue that way. And you don't really need a lot of attack speed in order to get beyond the other weapons. So if I pick up any sword from this, like Azure Wrath, for example, that has attack speed on it, so that wouldn't be a good example. Let's use Doombringer. Doombringer and this random sword. As we can see right now, I have 1.1 attacks per second. If I attack, I do not get any random attack speed. So now we can see how much attack speed I would need before I need to start equipping my daggers. So if I equip, let's say, I think this is about 7.5% attack speed. If we hover over my attack speed bonus now, it says 1.18. So after about 10% attack speed, I'll be above 1.2, and then I can just start using daggers for the rest of my test instead. Now, when you start doing this, for example, and you have 1.2 attacks per second, and you start tracking this data, you're gonna get a certain amount of frames between each attack, and that's perfectly normal. What you do after that is that you increase this by as small increments as possible to make sure you get all of the attack speed breakpoints as fast as possible. So if I use, for example, daggers at 1.2 and then 1.3 attack speed, I get 1.12 attacks per second. I then track this data by attacking the dummy like 20-30 times just to have enough attacks to collect data from. I record it, I open it with, open that file with something like VLC, and it would look something like this. This is all the attack speed breakpoints that I've collected for puncture. So if I open my 1.3 attacks per second data, and then I skip frames until a damage instance has happened, like this, I would then go on and count all of the frames that happens between those two damage instances, like this. You note that attack speed down, like it could be 24, I think it's 24 frames in this case. I would recommend using a tap counter, so you use one finger to tap on your keyboard to skip the frame, and then the other hand to tap on your phone or something to track how many times you've tapped, so you don't have to count like 58 frames in your head and something like stuff like that. Once you've collected all of these, you will get a lot of data, and how you compile it is up to you. This is the final version of for me. I basically did this, and it's not pretty, but it's just how I started doing it, so it's why I ended up doing it for the whole time, like the whole every test. But as you can see here, 1.3 attack speed with a 1.2 weapon, resulting in 24 frames. When I went to 2.5% attack speed, I actually got down to 23 frames instead. Now, the data you get might look something like this. You see how these numbers are sort of juggled up and down and sort of mixed, but they do converge an average to 23 frames. This is actually very intentional from the game. The game is like compensating by itself. But it might be because the server doesn't react fast enough, or like you're attacking at some weird rate. It will always converge to a whole number, and sometimes you might not get enough data, so it might look like something like this, 23.09. If it's going towards a whole number like this, it's going towards 23, you can basically guarantee that this is 23 frames. If it ends up being like, I don't know, like this, 24.5, you would have to collect more data because you don't know if it's going towards 24 or if it's going towards 25. When you've collected a little bit of data, you could get the 1 attacks per second sort of value, basically the base frame, and create some sort of estimation based off of that. I got this value now because I've collected a lot of data before. So I have the formula here that is roughly representing the attacks per second for puncture. But basically what I do, if I have a character that has a 1.0 attacks per second weapon, I quickly test how many frames is that. That would give me a base frame. In this case, puncture has a base frame of 28. Now, I wonder, so for example, let's say, I wonder how many frames, how much attack speed I would need for, let's see, 20 frames. This, I've added that I'm using a dagger here by saying 1.2. If I was wondering how much I needed for sword, it would be 1.1 instead. But this formula shows that, okay, I would need roughly 19% attack speed to get 20 frames with puncture. Then I can go in and test, okay, what is the actual breakpoint for this? And from when I tested this and calculated like the frames and stuff, I got a new breakpoint at around 20% attack speed, which is very close to the 19 that this formula is expecting. So once you know the rough estimated value for a frame, or like for the at least for the 1.0 attacks per second, you can actually use that as a guideline to sort of determine um, how much attack speed you would need to meet that breakpoint, and then just verify it from there. Now, the reason why this formula is very bad overall, this is at least an approximation based on data, but if we use the if I had a 1.0 attack speed weapon, it would show 28 frames, like roughly. If I use that 28 and I divide it by the target frames that we would have, so this, in this example, so 20 frames, and I divide it by the attacks per second that I want, sorry, the weapon that I have, weapon attack speed, which is 1.2, and then I remove 1 just to show this as like the amount of increase I need, it would show me that I need 16.67%. This isn't that far off, it's 3.3% away from the real attack speed breakpoint. But it's still pretty far off. And when we start going into like how many frames, well, how much attack speed would I need for 9 frames, it would start saying 159%. Well, the real attack speed that I needed was 180%, which is 21% away from what this estimated. So it's going to be a tedious process, and you will have to do a lot of verification. But this is essentially what I did. For classes that had a lot of different attack speed sources that you're not really going to run into a situation where you have low attack speed at any point, you can start your collection at 1 attacks per second just to see the base, and then use that as estimation to calculate the attack speed requirements you need for 100% and more, for example, or 60% or more, just to narrow down the amount of attack speed breakpoints you need to collect. For example, if I would have done that for puncture, I would have only collected 4 values for daggers. Again, this is a very slow process, and the most important part is that you increase it with as small increments as possible. Here you can see my error margin, which says 1.3 and 1.2. This should be a little bit lower because it's not actually 1.3, it's 1.25. but this gives at least like a 1.3% attack speed error instead of the current formulas like this one that we have used before that gives us a 21% error margin compared to what the actual result is. If you do this carefully enough, we will have this error margin for everything, which is very close, and it at least gives us like the confidence that these values are the correct breakpoints. At least like this will guarantee a new breakpoint, while if you do it with small increments, you will also have the gap between it, what will be the breakpoint and what wasn't the breakpoint before. You can use Excel to do a graph like this, where you plug in the data. It's up to you if you want to use it. I kind of like it just to see if my data is behaving like it should, and we can see that some data is a little bit above the graph and then some is a little bit below, but it roughly follows this curve. It's completely up to you though. The most important values to get are these attack speed, attacks per second values. Certain skills are gonna be more annoying than others. Just track resource spent or anything like that. It will help you like make it a lot faster. I wish I would have known that when I started collecting like rapid fire or barrage data, that I could just do it that way instead. But it's probably the easiest way to do it. For other classes that can't spam core skills back to back, make sure you use something like Starless to mitigate the problem. You can grab resource cost reduction on your weapons, like anything like that. You don't want to sit here and, you know, test this for a long time. Apart from that, it's just a slow process. Enjoy the grind.